Don't test me, Kirk! I will break you! Clean it up.
Welcome everybody to another episode of the TrekLore Update, where I take a recent episode of Star Trek and update the Trek canon with all of the new things that we learned in that episode. My apologies for this one being a bit late. Life has gotten a bit crazy, but I did not want this one to go by without doing this episode. And of course, we've got more episodes coming in the next few weeks, so I'm going to be trying hard to get caught up on this. Thank you so much for bearing with me and being patient. This video is all about Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 5, Charades. As was mentioned in the first episode of this season, Christine Chapel is applying for a 2-month fellowship in archaeological medicine with the Vulcan Science Academy. We see that application and the outcome of that in this episode. The initial interview is shown and it does not seem to go well. After that, she makes contact with the Kerkovians, a non-corporeal life form, and an experience that results in them teaching her an ancient medical technique. As expected, by the end of the episode, she is turned down for the fellowship, but her experience in this episode has made her realize that the fellowship may not be ready for her, and she intends to publish a paper based on her experiences with the Kerkovians. And in another new update to the lore of Trek, the end of the episode sees the beginning of a romantic relationship between Chapel and Spock. Early in the episode, Spock mentions that he uses nasal suppressants because of the odor that humans carry with them. This is not unlike T'Pol's nasal numbing agent from Star Trek Enterprise. A nice little reference to the continuity that human odor is offensive to Vulcans. And as was mentioned in Enterprise, Vulcan women are more sensitive to this smell than Vulcan men, as the character T'Pril mentions later in the episode. Spock has a brief turn as a full human in this episode, which gives him insight into human emotions and how they differ from his typical Vulcan emotions. We also learn about the first time that Vulcan children asked Spock to play with them as a child. Not only how that affected Spock, but how it affected his mother as well. And finally, in this episode, due to a breach of trust, Spock's relationship with T'Pring would seem to be maybe not at an end, but at least on hold. Subsequent to this incident, Spock initiates a romance with Christine Chapel.
We were on a break!
Now, I want to make a quick note here with reference to continuity. After watching this episode, I loaded up the TOS episode, The Naked Time, and it's very interesting how the events of this episode don't alter canon or contradict anything, but rather add a new layer to what we've seen before in Star Trek. The scene in which Spock's emotional barriers break down thanks to the Psi 2000 virus in the episode The Naked Time, and the subsequent conversation that he has with Christine Chapel in that episode are simply added to by what happens in this episode. I really love the added context that this gives, and like I said, having recently watched that episode myself, it works. It really works here. The writers have definitely done their homework as far as making this all fit together and doing it in ways that we as viewers might not necessarily expect. And I have to say, I was very much surprised at how well it works. This episode is a great one for Spock's mother, Amanda. We learn a lot about her and see things from her perspective in a way that we haven't before. Living on Vulcan for many years has taught Amanda, for example, how to suppress her own pain, as we see her handling a traditional Vulcan kettle here at temperatures that would burn a human's hands, but she has learned to suppress those feelings and push through. This episode also acknowledges Amanda's difficulty in living on Vulcan emotionally, and the pain that she experienced being an outsider and shunned by Vulcans, especially other Vulcan mothers. We see that on display here with the way that T'Pring's mother, refers to and looks at Amanda with this disdain, and Spock's acknowledgement of the strength that Amanda had to get through all of that and to be the most compassionate, wise person that she is, despite that treatment, is just a treat to watch. And Mia Kirshner plays this so well. The appreciation and tears in her eyes as Spock acknowledges this experience is a true delight to watch, and one of my favorite aspects of this episode. Spock's betrothed, T'Pring, has a poor relationship with her mother. Her relationship with T'Pril is indeed less than ideal. This makes me wonder if T'Pring's actions in Amok Time may have a bit more of an explanation now that we've seen the influence her mother has had on her. T'Pring in that episode treats Spock terribly, and throughout Strange New Worlds so far, we've gotten more context about that, with the idea that T'Pring may have been more wronged by Spock than we got the impression was the case in Amok Time. But on top of that, T'Pril's attitude of prejudice and not caring whatsoever for the feelings or desires of other people, and I mean, you may roll your eyes and say, yeah, that's Vulcan, but not necessarily. T'Pring really pushed it to the extreme, I feel like, in Amok Time, and as I say, we may see that the origin of that attitude is indeed from her very abrasive and judgmental mother. Speaking of T'Pril, she is highly critical of her daughter and even more so of Spock, whom she sees as having a handicap due to his mixed heritage. She seems to be prejudiced against all things human, and as I mentioned earlier, treats Amanda in particular with disdain. She's very controlling and imposes her will upon her family, wearing down her daughter T'Pring, as well as clearly stifling her husband Savek's more liberal attitudes. Speaking of Savek, he is the father of T'Pring and husband of T'Pril. He defers to his wife in what may be only logical decision-making here, but he does seem to be enthusiastic about trying new things and is fascinated by Pike's Vulcan food and the human game of charades. The other new named character that we meet in this episode is Durek, an instructor at the Vulcan Science Academy, and the person who rejects Chapel's application to the Fellowship. Quite honestly, probably to the relief of Chapel by the time this episode is done.
Vulcans can be such jerks.
We learn about a new planet and moon system within the Vulcan star system. The planet Kirkov and its moon that was once home to an ancient civilization. A rupture in space-time has been detected just above the surface of the Kirkovian moon, which leads to the discovery of the Kirkovians, who have not in fact died out or left, but have evolved to a higher plane of existence and live as non-corporeal beings. We meet two representatives of this civilization, Yellow and Blue. Trespassers who happen upon their vortex are repaired by the Kirkovians, calling it remediation. We get our first direct reference to Dr. Roger Corby, the character from the TOS episode What Are Little Girls Made Of? In this episode, his 3 principles of archaeological medicine are referenced. Number 1, medicine is always ancient and new as culture's understanding of what medicine is changes over time. Number 2, the keys to solving our toughest medical problems are often found by looking backward. And number 3, as a result, archaeological medicine is as much a study of history as it is a science. He might want to consider adding a 4th one: don't download your consciousness into an android body. The results are never ideal. We also learn of the Vulcan tradition of the Vishal dinner, a series of rituals that is required when a couple is engaged. Failure of the ritual would result in a break of the betrothal agreement between two Vulcans, resulting in the union being unrecognized under Vulcan law. Traditionally served at the Vishal dinner is a dish called Tev Mel, made with something called halak. Interestingly, in Star Trek Enterprise, Subcommander T'Pol said that Vulcans do not eat with their hands, but it would seem that Tev Mel is a sort of appetizer-like dish that is eaten with one's own hands. It's possible that T'Pol didn't speak for all Vulcans, and it's also worth noting that Vulcan may not be a monoculture. There are likely different cultural groups within the greater Vulcan sphere who have different traditions. Also, it should be noted that that episode of Enterprise was a century earlier, and things may have changed. The Vishal ritual itself has 3 parts. The husband-to-be serves tea using the family recipe to his fiancé's parents. Next is the ritual of awakening, in which the couple are informed of the areas in which they can improve by their parents-in-law. And finally, there is a mind meld between the future groom and his parent, in which a memory from his childhood is shared. Well, those were all of the Easter eggs and additions to canon that I was able to find in this episode. Was there anything that I overlooked? Please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Thank you, of course, for watching, and thanks especially, as always, to the Patreon supporters for all of your help in bringing these episodes to you. Thank you so very much. To everyone else, once again, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next episode. Until then, as always, live long and prosper.